Potential for war with Iran, and we've got gold up near those all-time highs. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights brought to you by Ainslie Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, we welcome back Sam, who's been looking closer at the real prospect of a broader war in the Middle East and how that might impact the price of gold going forward. How are you going today, Sam?
Good, Chris. Good to be back.
Lots happening, and you've really dug in. I know Biden was, I don't know if he touched down sort of yesterday our time or recently anyway, in Israel and having conversations there. So lots happening on the geopolitical front. And I want to start off today by looking at the article you published, noticing there was that really shocking quote at the beginning from a US general. Is that something that's received much publicity? Because that seemed like something that was really quite significant.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the quote. It was, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. And then he says, this is General Wesley Clark in an interview with Democracy Now! And then he asked the person he was talking to, is it classified? And he said, yes, sir. It's classified. So this did get a lot of media coverage, but it was back in 2007. So you can see right. This 5-year plan went a little bit over 5 years, but it's starting to resonate with all the stories you're seeing now.
Well, it certainly seems that way, doesn't it? Like it looks like some of this could align with that sort of view. And certainly if that was being planned all that time ago, that's a little bit concerning. Do you think that, like, if you look at it from that angle, that either intentionally or not, Iran will be dragged into this? Do you think like that's intentional, or do you think that it stays as a bit of a proxy war? Because you could argue up until now it's certainly been a proxy war with the US sort of sitting on the side and Iran playing. They seem to be playing with other people in the middle, but ultimately, the strings are being pulled from afar. How do you see all of that?
Well, sitting on the side, I mean, some U.S. aircraft carriers and a Navy fleet, they aren't sitting too far aside.
No, they're pretty close.
Right off the coastline, making a shadow for Biden, who went over. But if you look at some headlines, and this not just recently, but even at the start. So at the start, when this kicked off, the headlines were, there's no signs that, Iran is involved. Is Iran involved? We don't have any hard evidence. So it's questions about Iran's involvement. So why ask the question if you don't think there is, So it's kind of pushing things in that direction. But now if you look at headlines, even just today or in the recent day, you can see some headlines here. I'll read some off. So one is Donald Trump warns Iran is building large-scale nuclear arsenal. It's from Newsweek. ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, has, will the U.S.-Gaza war expand to Iran's proxies? Reuters has Iran's Middle East allies primed as Israel-Hamas war rages. And then last but not least, we have Senator Lindsey Graham, who went on NBC, and he has some fiery quotes as well. Not from 2007, but from the last day. And some of the things he says are, Iran, if you escalate this war, we're coming for you. And he also noted that if Hezbollah enters war, Iran will be, quote unquote, in the crosshairs of U.S. and Israel. So very, very direct.
Yeah, that's pretty provocative stuff coming directly from the administration.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I suppose we know there's a lot going on there, and we really have to sit and watch, I suppose, see what happens next. But the question on all of our minds, we've got gold up near those all-time highs in Australian dollars. Like it's looking very strong, which, to be fair, is partly to do with the Aussie dollar looking very weak here. We know that gold typically rises in value during wars, but can you maybe break down for us some of your specific reasons why you think this conflict could possibly fuel a further rise?
Yeah, so the first one is a safe haven asset. If people aren't familiar with the term safe haven, it just means, if a missile comes down and hits a company or nearby, it can go out of business, but gold can't because it's too simple. It's just an element on the periodic table. Also, if things are shifted around in a country, say a country gets dragged into war, there's going to be less focus put on luxury consumer goods and electronics and things like that, and more resources are going to be allocated towards the war effort, where things like bullets and bombs and aircraft are needed, not some home product that's simply a luxury. The other thing is currency devaluation. So there's a saying that central banks were simply created to fund wars. Well, you can look at that the other way around, I guess, and say, if there's a war on, who's going to fund the war? Now, the US is in the interesting position. It looks like we're funding 2 wars. So is that an expensive endeavor? Well, you bet, especially after already giving Iran billions of dollars as part of a nuclear deal. And it looks like that hasn't really done anything. The other thing is supply chain disruptions. Now, being near the center of the world, near all these waterways, and bringing in so many countries, who's China going to side with? Who's Russia going to side with? It's clear who the US is siding with and who the UK is siding with. They've sent some Navy over as well. This could wreak havoc on supply chains. We saw what happened in China when the government foolishly tried to limit gold imports, and then they inadvertently sent the price of gold rocketing to $100 US premium per ounce.
Yep.
So exactly what they didn't want to do. So they had to quickly backpedal that one. So supply chains are another big thing. And last of all, it's central bank policy. So central banks want to protect themselves. We already know they've been buying record gold in the past year. How's that going to change when things start falling apart, when countries are all printing money to fund wars? Well, they might increase their gold buying even further.
There's so much there, and it's really interesting because some of the stuff I put out yesterday, where the video that I did, where we were looking at global liquidity and where we are in the cycle, and then you layer this on top, and it really seems to be almost an accelerant to what was already looking likely to happen, where things like devaluation and more currency being printed, all of that was sort of baked into the cake with the debt as it was. But then when you start adding in, like you were talking about there, the need for more funding being pushed out, that's more debt onto the pile, which accelerates those central bank policies. And then you throw on supply chain. Like there's so much in there that really makes.
And what's Jerome Powell going to say? We're still tackling consumer prices or something like that in the face of funding 2 wars.
Yeah, that's that's right. That gets pushed to the back burner, surely.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. Really quite interesting times. So I suppose, do you think this is a question I know you've probably had a bit of thought around, but do you think that a war with Iran, so if we bring it back to that premise that that's possible, is this something like what we saw with the Iraq war? Is this, do we have a comparison here if that's the way that this goes?
Well, if you want to talk about spending a huge amount of money, okay, the Iraq war is a good example, but in any other way, it's not. So firstly, the population is over 3x. If we're going to go against Iran, it's a much bigger population. Military personnel, they have roughly 2 times the size of Iraq at the time the war kicked off. So much bigger military. Geographically, it's very, very difficult. So they're protected by the Caspian Sea to the north. They have the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman in the south. And there's such a narrow strait there that if the US Navy or any other Navy was trying to get through there, they could just be picked off one by one very easily.
Duck in a narrow strait, wouldn't you?
Yeah. How are they going to get, boats into the Persian Gulf? It's just not going to work very well. And Iran has different forces. They have different segments of their navy. They have forces separate to the government, not to mention that they're surrounded by countries who, to say the least, are not very friendly with the United States. So it's a very, very hard target to reach, and very well insulated with other countries and waterways, which are well protected.
So that's not painting a great picture if it does go that way. I mean, I know you're sort of saying that with a bit of balance there, that, you know, none of that's a certainty, but you're certainly looking at risks when we start off, when we bring it right back to that first quote, that potentially some of this is what people are wanting, you know, like it's partly what was potentially orchestrated to some degree. So definitely concerning.
Yeah, that interview back in 2007 on Democracy Now, that was very well publicized. And General Wesley Clark, after doing that interview, he went on mainstream headlines and kind of said the opposite, which was quite funny. And then now we have all these headlines about Iran. It's looking pretty scary.
Well, on that note, we'll leave it there. But thank you for that dive into that today, and certainly it will be stuff that we're all watching because it's unfolding in real time as we speak. So we'll be paying attention to that, and we'll check in with you again on that next week. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks everyone for watching. Remember, if you've got any questions or comments, reach out on those social platforms. That's us for today, and that's us for this week as well. We'll be back most likely on Tuesday with Alex to discuss all things markets and metals. Until then, have a great rest of the week and weekend, everyone.